Do you think that death, in the literary world, but generally in life, remains taboo? The fact that it came so close, did that change your view of it again?
What happens when you have a narrow escape like that is that it gives you a sense of the value of the days.
What Trump has done to America, do you think? Do you think he's elevated shamelessness?
The three countries that I spent my life thinking about and writing about, which is India and England and the United States, there's some degree of that happening everywhere.
What you made of the fact that this week that the BBC censored or removed a line from Rutger Bregman's
The
speech
BBC continues
in
to be
replay.
really stupid, I think.
Dr. Salman Rushdie, welcome to the Newsagents. It's a great pleasure to have you in the studio with us. So thank you. I suppose my first question, kind of concerning the 11th Hour, is that you have spent probably half of your life under the threat of death. Why only now writing about mortality?
I'm getting on a bit, I think is probably the answer.
Yeah.
I think part of it is just that. Part of it is just, when you arrive at this age, first of all, you start losing people. You start losing friends and things like that, and the world changes. And then, of course, I had a pretty close look at the end, and that focuses the mind as well. So for those two reasons, I think I began to think about stories about the final act. What it's like to be in Act 5 of the play.
Writing that book, has it changed your outlook? Has it kind of left you at peace with Act 5 of the play, or do you still want to go raging into the night?
No, I think raging is probably the way.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Go out, all guns blazing.
Yeah, I think so. I think, this was not... I've noticed that some people writing about the book have wondered if it was a kind of farewell. And I'm just here to tell you it's not. It's just the new book. And, I hope to keep going, for as long as the ideas keep coming.
Do you think that death, in the literary world, but generally in life, remains taboo?
I don't know. I don't think so. I think, I talk about it with friends and family, and I think there's a kind of equanimity that comes from having it out in the open.
As John said, though, death, very unusually for your life, it has stalked you. It has been a presence in your life, or the prospect of it, in a way that most people do not confront. How do you think that has changed, if it has, how you think about death?
Well, it focuses the mind. It makes you think about it more clearly in a way. But what I wanted in this, as you say, having thought about this for a very long time, I wanted the book not to be ponderous. I didn't want it to be a kind of dark, gloomy, we're all going to die kind of book.
No, it's very much not.
But I wanted it to be kind of playful and mischievous and funny, while dealing with this, very serious thing that's going to come to us all.
Do you think that I was struck on the first sort of short story, or the first story in the book, one of the characters describes, or you describe one of the characters as basically having achieved little in life, but it doesn't bother him terribly much. That's not true of you, but you almost write about it as if, almost admiringly, that someone might think that.
Well, I've met people like that, and that story in the South came about after a visit to South India, to the city I still call Madras, but you're supposed to call Chennai. And I met old gentlemen like this, who complained bitterly about everything, including still being alive, but were quite cheerful about it, in a very oddly contradictory way. And the story came out of listening to these old gents bitch like crazy about everything in the world, including their families, and yet being somehow very full of life still, And I thought that's...
I loved the quote of one where you say that, you didn't know, kind of, you're just waiting to die, and the other one says, yeah, but you've never learned how to live.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a kind of perfect summation of some people have just kind of spent their whole life so miserable.
Yes.
That have kind of never really embraced.
Yeah, but I thought what was nice about those two old geezers is that all they do is complain about each other and bitch about each other, but actually underneath that there's a kind of love. There's a kind of affection that they don't quite know how to express.
Yeah.
And so their arguments and their kind of apparent hostility to each other is a disguise for friendship and for intimacy.
I say that death has stalked your life, certainly for the last 30, 40 years. Obviously, in 2022, when you were stabbed multiple times in New York, that prospect, that spectre, became very real,
Yes,
very physical, confronted you literally. Did that, despite the fact that you had lived under the threat of death for so long, the fact that it came so close, did that change your view of it again?
Well, it changed my view of life more than of death. Because I think what happens when you have a narrow escape like that is that it gives you a sense of the value of the days. That you're given another act, so you're given another spell of life, which in many ways was unlikely, because of the seriousness of the injuries. So then you get it. You get an extra lease of life. And you feel the value of it. You feel the value of each day. And what it's made me feel is, don't waste your time. If you're given an extra bit of time, use it. Don't waste it.
Do you feel you've wasted any time in your life?
I've tried not to, but I think it's the urgency has increased, I think.
I wonder. Look, I was working as a reporter on The World at One when the fatwa came through, and I think The World at One rang you.
Oh yeah, was that who rang me?
Yeah.
Yes.
And so there was this kind of shock in the newsroom when the Ayatollah Khomeini had issued the fatwa, and then suddenly we contact you and sort of, what's your reaction, sir? And you say, well, it's the first I've heard of it. I mean, that seemed so shocking then, and yet somehow political violence today seems to have, if not normalised, it's become much, much more frequent.
Yes, yeah. I mean, that's true. I mean, it's the world is more violent than it was back in 1989. I mean, what seemed exceptional in 1989 feels less exceptional now.
Do you think that what you experience, in a sense, it strikes me almost as a sort of portent of what was to come?
Well, when I wrote my earlier memoir, Joseph Anton, I began it by likening what happened to me to the scene in Alfred Hitchcock's movie The Birds, when there are children in a classroom and outside there's like a climbing frame and one bird comes down and sits on the climbing frame. And one bird doesn't mean anything, it's just a bird. But each time he cuts back to the climbing frame, there's more and more and more until there's hundreds and hundreds of birds. And I've sometimes felt that what happened to me was the first bird.
I wonder, for example, what you thought when you saw Charlie Kirk's murder.
Well, I'm against murder.
Well, that's good.
that's my reaction.
But it must have, given your particular history, and as you say, this what happens to you being a sort of portent of these things.
Yeah,
it must strike you. You must have a particular perspective on it.
I mean, I don't really. I just thought the man got killed who didn't deserve to die. And I think you have to feel that, even if it's a political opponent.
But what does it say about our society that, what in 1989 seemed so extraordinary and so completely unbelievable, that today you hear people leaving public life because their lives have been threatened. You hear people not going into public life because their fear of their lives being threatened. You hear the security being ramped up for all sorts of politicians and people who are in the public eye in a way that was just unimaginable even a decade ago.
Well, I think it's more unimaginable here because there isn't a gun culture here in the way that there is in America. I mean, the enormous number of weapons in private hands in the United States makes violence more likely. I mean, you're talking here about political violence, but, there are attacks on schools and things like that, almost every week now in America. So if you live in a society which has become so accustomed to gun violence, it's less surprising, I guess.
I suppose in a way, what happened to Kirk and what happened to many other people has happened to many other people in public life. It strikes me. They're victims of absolutism, of a form of absolutism in a way that you were. Perhaps it feels more that we have more absolutism now than we did.
Well, I think what we certainly have is, and one of the things I tried to write about this book is a kind of fracturing in society where people take up very, very embedded, entrenched positions on both sides of the fracture. And the fracture is very deep and very wide, and it's actually quite hard to see how you repair it.
Do you see how America got there?
Well, as I say, part of it is to do with it being a gun culture. I think it's important to keep reminding ourselves of the fact that there are more guns in private ownership in the United States than there are people.
But I read a very interesting quote you said about America. Kind of once upon a time, Americans knew what they were. They may disagree politically with each other,
Yes.
but broadly speaking, they knew who they were. They knew what it was to be an American. And you say that sense of identity has gone, whereas in France, people still know what it is to be French.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, for example, you can't imagine even a decade or so ago that the Republican Party would be so affectionate towards Russia. I mean, in the days of the Soviet Union, it was quite clear who the adversary was. And it's very strange to find the Conservative Party in the United States becoming so okay with the idea of cozying up to Vladimir Putin. That's an amazing transformation. And of course, on the other side of the spectrum, that's considered to be horrifying. But that's an indication of the way in which the place has been intellectually divided.
You know America very well. I was struck by a line in the book where you say, these are the days in which shamelessness is king.
Yeah.
Now, I know you weren't necessarily referring to America or Trump in that regard, but it strikes me that, is that what Trump has done to America, do you think? Do you think he's elevated shamelessness?
I think I think that is true, but I think it's also not happening only in America. I think one of the things I felt is writing this book was that the three countries that I spent my life thinking about and writing about, which is India and England and the United States, there's some degree of that happening everywhere.
What do you mean by it, shamelessness?
Well, people brazenly getting away with unrepentant, dreadful actions. In India, the increase in religious sectarianism and the way in which minorities are treated, the way in which people in the arts and journalism and the academy are treated, brazenly and absolutely without any pretext or reason to attack people, that people are being attacked. So I just think, these are tough times, and it needs to be said, and it needs to be argued against.
What do you think the answer is to shamelessness? Is there a way back? Because once you sort of unleash that, and it becomes okay to act in a way where it would once not have been okay.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't really know the answer to it, but I do see that there is a pushback. And just things that have been happening in the United States in recent weeks. I mean, for example, in the last week or so, there have been a large number of elections to school boards around the country. And in all those cases, in every single case, all the people on the boards who were the people who were banning books have been voted off the board. And people who just want an ordinary education for their kids have been voted on. So this enormous wave of book banning has been combated by a rejection of that wave by very large sections of the population, and not only in liberal parts of America.
Yeah, it's so interesting because, we had the Vice President J.D. Vance come over to Europe, speak at the Munich Security Conference, wag his finger at everybody on the importance of free speech and how it's being eroded. And yet you describe a situation in America, as you describe, where books are being banned and certain thoughts are not allowed, and people are being kind of cancelled left, right and centre if they are not following the sort of MAGA orthodoxy of the day.
I don't think that J.D. Vance has any standing to talk about free expression, because it's quite true that, as you say, that the push towards controlling speech in America is coming very largely from the right. There is some coming from the left of kind of political orthodoxy, what is okay to say and what is not okay to say. But the great attack is coming, against television networks, against comedians, against universities, schools. It's all coming from the kind of Trump the Trump reinvention of the Republican Party.
I wonder, in that vein, what you made of the fact that this week that the BBC censored or removed a line from Rutger Bregman's
I know the
speech
BBC continues to be really stupid, I think. And there's no cure for stupidity.
Expand on that. What do you mean?
Well, I mean, I don't believe that the BBC even 5 or 10 years ago would have done that. So it's just dumb. And it gives ammunition to people who would like to take down public broadcasting. I mean, I think the BBC is an enormously valuable institution, but it seems to have done some dumb things of late.
Is that a lack of self-confidence? Is it to do with them feeling that they have got to appease, Donald Trump, certainly, because they're faced with such a huge legal action? I wonder what you think the roots of this are.
I don't know. You're asking the wrong person. I don't walk those corridors enough to know what's going on. But I know that it's something that the BBC would not have done, a decade ago, this kind of foolishness.
But is this it's anticipatory deference almost, that you fear what could cause trouble?
Yes.
And then you...
Yes, pre-censorship. Censorship before you need to do anything. And as I say, I don't know. I don't sit in those rooms where these decisions are taken, but it does seem like a kind of cowardly thing to do.
But that's the most disturbing thing of all, isn't it? Is when you stop saying things, not because actually anybody has even taken issue or contested it, but you're doing it in the anticipation of someone contesting it.
And I mean, in America, that was happening a lot. I think it's only just beginning to change, where people are beginning to stand up to the enormous attack from this administration and beginning to push back a little bit. But it's a long way. The pushback has a long way to go.
Do you think that America, and indeed our politics generally, is being gripped by authoritarian impulses now?
Well, I mean, the most worrying thing, I think, is the way in which young people are being attracted to the right wing. And again, that's not by any means unique to the United States, although it's true that especially young men voted for the Republican ticket in the last election in a way that they didn't before. But I mean, last year when I was traveling around Europe, when my memoir came out, I was told in various countries, Germany, France, Italy, that young voters were voting for the extreme right. So in Germany, the AfD got a lot of support from young and first-time voters, and France, the Le Pen parties, and in Italy also, the Meloni party.
Reform and Farage here do well among young people.
I mean, I was last time I was in London a couple of months ago, there was this huge demonstration of what I was told was like 150,000 people protesting against immigration. And I thought, if that's happening in London, that's very sad.
Yeah, and that is the rise of the far right. Why do you think young people... I mean, the conventional view is that young people kind of grow up with left-wing ideals, and then they kind of drift further to the right into middle age as, they've got more money, etc.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think there is some of that still, but which we see in the Gaza protests, for example. But I do think there's a kind of disillusion with the institutions of democracy. People feel that it hasn't delivered, and so they look elsewhere towards strongman politics.
And when you look at the sort of defenders of democracy as we've seen, as we have it at the moment, the status quo, you might say, people like Keir Starmer, equivalents in America, do you think that they're up to defending
it? I really do feel a little out of the loop here in the UK. I'm not here that much, and I don't have my finger on the pulse quite in the way that I used to. But I do think it's true that the Labour Party, having won this colossal landslide so recently, has managed to squander that capital with immense speed. And that's a little shocking, more than a little shocking.
Is that because governance has become so much more difficult in an age of social media, in kind of sort of almost rabid opinion, whether on one side of the argument or on another side of the argument, that just to say, look, this is complicated, it might take time, is not what people want to hear anymore. They want instant solutions to problems, and they want people who, are pugilists and populists and who can make their case.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of truth in that. And I also think there's a reluctance here to point to the most obvious cause for Britain's difficulties, which is Brexit. The fact that enormous shift in the economic structure of this country and its consequences explains not everything, but it explains really a lot of of the trouble the country's in. And yet nobody of any political party is willing to say that.
What do you make of Britain now, and British political
you know,
life
I
now?
mean, the country is the country. People are the people are the people. I'm very fond of it, but I think it's in a mess. But then I think everywhere's in a mess.
Well, let me go back to the quote I gave you earlier about that the Americans seem to have lost their sense of identity, whereas when you're in France, you know
Yes.
what the French think. Has Britain lost some of its sense of identity, do you think?
Maybe, as I say, I'm not here enough to really know that. But I do think the divide in society is here as well. And when societies get this deeply divided, then the idea of what it is to be a citizen, what it is to be a member of that society, becomes questionable and uncertain and shaken. And I think there is some of that going on here.
I wonder what you make of the rise of, and it's something America has had more of than we have, but you see it here as well, the rise increasingly of a racialized politics. And in particular, driven by X and so on, social media, terms are being re-legitimized, racial terms, theories like, or ideas like re-immigration or the Great Replacement theory. These are things now being discussed openly in a way that they would never have been. I wonder what you make of.
Well, I'm kind of horrified by it. I mean, I'm an immigrant. I mean, I'm a double immigrant. I immigrated to this country from India a long time ago, and then from here to the United States 26 years ago. So I'm biased on the subject. It seems to me that immigrants have brought an enormous amount of positive things to the societies they come to.
The argument the radical right posits is that mass immigration dilutes the character of a nation, the identity of a nation, exactly in the way that you were describing about losing identity.
Yeah, but that's a racist argument. And in the modern world, all societies in the world are plural and multiple. They're not monoculture. The idea of a monoculture is out of the window in the age of movement. So many people move across the world for so many reasons. Every great city in the world, including London, is evidence of that kind of multifariousness. And a lot of the richness of these cities comes from that diversity.
Very few people in politics seem to want to defend that idea.
Yeah, well, that's the problem. But I've spent my life trying to defend it, and I'm not stopping now.
I wonder. I know that you experienced some racism when you first came to the UK.
Yeah, it's a long time ago.
A long time ago as a schoolboy in rugby. I don't know if you've seen this week that Nigel Farage has been caught up in some trouble around accusations of racism when he was a schoolboy, and he said that the people involved can't possibly really remember any potential racism that he allegedly dished out.
Oh, well, he's wrong about memory. That's just a mistake about memory. People to whom bad things happen often remember for a lifetime exactly what happened to them. And the things that happened to me, which I now tend to discount, happened when I was 13 or 14 years old, but I remember them very vividly. So memory is not as easily lost as Mr. Farage seems to think.
So you remember the racism you received as a schoolboy?
Yes, I do. I remember it as if it happened yesterday.
Yes, and it's the case that if you are a minority and the victim of that sort of abuse, I'm Jewish, and kind of the odd bits of anti-Semitism that I have faced in my life are things that you never forget.
You never forget, exactly. I mean, I used to make a joke about English boarding schools that there were three mistakes you could make. One was to be clever, another was to be foreign, and the third was to be bad at games. And you could get away with two of those, but you couldn't get away with all three. And I'm afraid I had three strikes. And I've always felt that was the reason for the problem. If I'd been a brilliant cricketer, I might have been forgiven for being foreign.
You wrote home and told your family how brilliant you were at cricket.
I know, I lied. I was terrible at cricket.
It's interesting, though, isn't it, that those debates are coming back, and it does. And what Lewis was saying about the fact that epithets used against individuals, which you kind of it seemed to disappear, are kind of coming back, and it's now sort of okay, vulgarity or offensiveness.
Yes, I think that's really true, and it's very worrying. I mean, there are things happening now, battles which have to be fought again, which I thought had been won a long time ago, and some of that kind of language, that's one of the issues, and religious extremism is another one, and there's a whole range of things where, when I was young, let's say when I was at university here at Cambridge, those things were unthinkable that they would re-emerge as central issues in society. What we were thinking about the Vietnam War, of course, but we were thinking about civil rights and feminism and things like that. We weren't thinking about these things, which have now surged back into the center of the debate, and I think that's a real tragedy.
Just wonder if we could just talk about books a little bit more generally for a moment. Obviously, you've lived your life as a man of letters. Really, you've been one of our foremost writers. And in the literary world, is literary culture? Is there a danger that it's dying out? In the sense that we can see from all of the surveys, in particular, that not only is reading for pleasure on the decline across the generational cohorts, but particularly for the young, in some cases is on the verge of dying out completely. What would it mean, do you think, if a society stopped reading for pleasure?
Well, I mean, it would impoverish the mental lives of the people who stop reading, because reading is one of the most nourishing things for one's mental life. I've always been reluctant to believe in the death of the book, because it feels to me sometimes that the death of the book has been prophesied almost ever since the birth of the book. And so many things were supposed to destroy reading: radio, television, films, so many things. And yet the book persists. So I suspect that it's never, the reading was never mass culture. Even a best-selling book, let's accept Harry Potter, that what I'm saying doesn't apply to Harry Potter. But with the exception of that, the readership for even a successful book doesn't compare to the viewership for a huge television success. So it's more of a niche market, and it always has been. But it's a very loyal niche market. People go on buying books. I mean, one of the things that happens during the book launch is that you talk to a lot of booksellers, and around America and around England. And I don't entirely see that pessimism amongst the book trade.
But it is difficult, isn't it, when you've got generations which are growing up and competing for their attention the entire time.
Yeah.
Is these things that we carry around in our pockets that are constantly gasping for our attention, buzzing and vibrating, and are addictive. And then on top of that, of course, we've got the rise of AI, which might not just act as reading for us, it thinks for us potentially.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think all of this is very problematic, and I don't have a solution to it except to go on doing what I do and to hope that there's still going to be a readership for it.
Does it worry you?
Yeah, I mean, but on the other hand, I had a friend who knows much more about AI than me, who asked, I think it was ChatGPT, I don't remember which one it was, but he asked it to write 300 words of me. And
in your style?
In my style, as if it was me. And it produced this text which was absolutely awful. and that nobody who'd ever read a page of my work would ever have mistaken this for something that I would have written. So that was comforting, I thought.
Even on the most ersatz level, did it not pass?
No, it was just garbage. And I was comforted by that. And I do think that one of the things about artificial intelligence is that it's not original. That, the way it works is that you feed everything into it and it produces versions of that. But you don't get an original idea. It's not. I mean, somebody in America, I forgot who, recently described it as the world's largest plagiarism machine. And that's what it feels like to me. It feels like what it lacks is originality, and what people want from art is originality.
What do you make, Sir Salman, now of the Anglo-Indian relationship? And because that's evolved enormously in recent years even. And occasionally you get politicians like Keir Starmer or David Cameron, or they go to India and they say this is going to be a new golden age and so on, and this is a sort of answer to the, our relative isolation in Europe now, our historic links and so on. Is that anything? Does that have any credibility in India?
Can I append to that what's happened to the US-Indian relationship, which again is absolutely fascinating under Trump, which was so great in the first term and so terrible now?
Yeah, I mean, I just think that India is also going through a kind of transformational moment because of the effect of the now very well-entrenched Modi administration. The attempt to change the country from its secularist origins to being a Hindu majoritarian culture is, I mean, very radically transformational and enormously of concern to minorities in India. And, the Muslim minority being the largest one is, a minority of 200 million people is a pretty big minority. So that majoritarian approach to culture and politics in India is it's changing the country in ways that many people are very alarmed about. I mean, I have a lot of friends amongst Indian journalists still, and all of them are really scared about what's happening in the country. So I think India is obsessed with that right now, and things like what its relationship to the UK is, I think is of much less significance.
When you say they're scared, just because some listeners and viewers won't have followed what's been going on, what are they scared about?
Well, there are attacks on journalists. There's really, we were talking about attacks in America on press freedom and so on, but that's very much happening in India, and people are very worried. Even someone like the Booker Prize winner Arundhati Roy is having legal cases brought against her for having said things which are perfectly reasonable things to say.
Do you think it will? There's always a speculation about India about one day becoming a superpower. Do you think it ever can or will be a superpower?
I think it obviously is a huge economy, but I think the problem is that the rich are very, very rich now, and the poor are at least as poor as they ever were. And I think that enormous inequity in the country is problematic, and I think in a way prevents the country from becoming the powerhouse that it could be.
I know that obviously you've written this book, The 11th Hour, and it was the first time, I think, since you published your memoir, Knife, if you felt, I think, that you couldn't write fiction again until you had published that.
Yeah.
Will you write more fiction?
Yes. I'm hoping to, yes.
It's not the 11th hour for you then?
No, not at all. I think maybe there's more hours than 12.
Yeah, I was just...
You're doing the 24-hour club.
I always think when I watch kind of, movie stars and they're on a chat show talking about their latest movie, which they filmed 2 years ago, and have probably had to be reminded of the part they played and the story of the movie by the sort of people behind the junket. I always think, well, Salman Rushdie, I bet you've already got 3 novels on the go or something like that already at the moment.
Well,
are there ideas that are fermenting, or is there already in the act of...
No, I've got one. That started off. I don't quite know where it's going yet, or exactly how to do it. But
is it about 2 brave podcast hosts who take on?
It's about
left the BBC.
It's about sitting in a darkened room with 2 people.
Sounds electric.
It's going to be a bestseller.
Yeah.
So Salman Rushdie, thank you so much.
Thank
you
you
for your time.
And before we go, this is a Friday episode, and this would be the moment where Lewis Goodall would normally take the piss out of Emily Maitlis and me for having some hugely decadent weekend while thanking everyone else really graciously.
It's usually true. It's normally true. You usually are kayaking off the Galician coast.
But today, actually, in our goodbyes, we want to say goodbye to one person in particular, Georgia Foxwell, who has been on the podcast since the beginning.
Indeed so. And she's been our fantastic social media producer. She's been a huge part of the success of the show. She's often made us look and sound better than we are. And so
Speak for yourself.
Well, indeed. So modest as ever. So we are very, very grateful to her. She is a star, Georgia. Best of luck for the future.
All good things for the future, Georgia. Thanks for everything you've done for us. We will be back on Monday. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.